Everyone, my name is James Ermita from Set A and I will discuss about the global economy. The United Nations or UN tried to address a different problem in the world. Their efforts, which guided the 8 Millennium Development Goals. The first one is the eradication of extreme poverty and hunger, achieving universal primary education, promoting gender equality and women empowerment, reducing child mortality, improving maternal health, combating diseases like HIV/AIDS and malaria, ensuring environmental sustainability, and the last one is having a global partnership for development. These 8 development goals is tried to achieve by UN by year 2015 and they created this by 1990s. Since there are different standard living around the world, we can expect a different meaning attached to it. So in the Philippines, a person is officially living in poverty if he make less than 100,534 pesos a year, around 275 pesos a day. This is called poverty line or poverty threshold. According to the United Nations, year 2015, it is characterized by severe deprivation by human basic needs, including food, water, facilities, and health shelter, education, and information. So according to this, we experience poverty because we have no enough education, a water, or food supplies and facilities that we need. The United Nations reported that 836 million people extremely living in the poverty, but that is down in 1.9 billion. So there is a success or at least a lot of progress. So sabi dito, by year 2015, bumaba ang kaso ng the World Bank predicted that by 2030, the number of people living in extreme poverty could drop at least 400 million. The climate change has to be considered as a threat to this environment and global poverty. So we all know that the climate change is the biggest problem to us and to our environment. Most of the people who have been lifted out of extreme poverty are still poor. And being poor comes with a serious problem like disease, lack of water, and income inequality. And 1 in 7 people live without electricity. So why extreme poverty is falling? The answer to this is really complicated. A set of factors like better access to education, humanitarian aid, and policies of international. So to solve the extreme poverty, we need to a better access of education, a proper shelter, and food, and good of water sources. So as of now, we have a lot of people who are not lifted out in extreme poverty, especially in the Philippines. Philippines is one of the country which is people are still poor and they have no proper job or proper education. That's all.
So, good day everyone. So, my topic for today is all about economic globalization and global trade. Economic globalization refers to the increasing interdependence of world economies as a result of growing scales of cross-border trade of commodities and services, flow of international capital, and wide and rapid spread of technology. So, economic globalization involves a wide variety of process opportunities and problems related to the spread of economic activities among countries around the world. And then, there are two different types of economies associated with economic globalization and trade liberalization. So, first is the protectionism. Protectionism means a policy of systematic government in intervention in foreign trade with the objective of the encouraging domestic production. So, trade protectionism usually comes in the forms of quotas, Tariff are required on imports or export. The policy was practiced during the mercantilist era. So, protectionism, it is the policy of protecting domestic industries against foreign competition by means of tariff, subsidies, or other restriction of handicaps placed on the imports of foreign competitors. So, protectionism may be helpful to emergent industries and developing nations. So, it says that this policy was practiced during the mercantilist era. Mercantilism or mercantilist era is an economic practice by which government use their economies to augment state power at the expenses of other countries. Governments sought to ensure that export exceeded imports and to accumulate wealth in the form of bullion, mostly gold and silver. So, mercantilism was an economic system of trade that spanned from the 16th to 18th century. So, next to the protectionism is the trade liberalization. So, trade liberalization is the removal or reduction of restriction or barriers on the free exchange of goods between nations. These barriers include tariffs such as duties and surcharges, and non-tariff barriers such as licensing rules and quotas. So, trade liberalization allows countries to specialize in producing the goods and services where they have a comparative advantage, which is product at lowest opportunity cost. So, the advantage of trade liberalization is the lower prices. The removal of tariff bars can lead to a lower prices for the consumers. So, next is free trade. World War II heavily influenced the shifting of the dominant economic policy from protectionism to trade liberalization or free trade. Free trade agreements and technological advance in transportation and communications means goods and services move around the world more easily than ever. So, in the modern world, free trade policy is often implemented by means of a formal and mutual agreement by the nations involved. Government with free trade policies or agreement in place do not necessarily abandon all controls of imports and export or eliminate all protectionist policies. So next is the globalization. Globalization made some countries, especially the developing ones, to gain more in the global economy at the expense of other nations. These are various ways, however, the country can make trade easier with other countries while lessening the inequalities in the global world. So, globalization reaps social benefits in developing the countries. And then, the benefit of globalization are true, for it has produced favorable results just as often as it has caused the ruins. It does lead to increased stability and interval security. It does lead to better human welfare. So next is the fair trade. Fair trade, as defined by the International Fair Trade Association, is the concern for the social, economic, and environmental well-being of marginalized small producers. It aims for more moral and equitable global economic system. Especially, it is concerned with protection of workers and producers. Establishment of more just prices, engagement in environmentally sound practices in sustainable production, creation of relationship between producers in the south and consumers in the north, and promotion of safe working environment. So, fair trade is a trading partnership. It is contribute to sustainable development by offering better trading conditions to and securing the rights of marginalized producers and the workers.
Hi, I'm Greya de la Cruz Ibnilao. My topic for today is about economic globalization and sustainable development. Economic globalization and sustainable development. There are significant downsides to globalized trade, and perhaps the strongest argument against economic globalization is its lack of sustainability or degree to which the Earth's resources can be used for our needs, even in the future. Sinasabi dito na yung mga kakulangan ng mga antas kung saan ang mga papagkukunan ng lupa ay maaari natin gamitin para sa ating mga pangangailangan kahit na sa hinaharap. Sustainable development. The development of today's world by using the Earth's resources and the preservation of such resources for the future. Development has to be secured for future generation. Sa pamamagitan ng mga yamang lupa natin, kailangan natin tiyakin ang mga pangangalaga nito para sa darating na hinaharap ay tiyak na maunlad ito. Borghese and Berselli, 2008. One significant global response to economic globalization is that of sustainable development, which seeks to chart a middle part between economic growth and sustainable environment. Ito ay naglalayong ng magtala ng paglago ng ekonomiya at napapanatiling kapaligiran. Relationship between globalization and sustainability. Multidimensional, it involves economic, political, and technological aspects. A continuous production of natural resources such as water and fossil fuel allows humanity to discover and innovate many things. Through this, we are able to utilize energy, discover new technologies, make advancement in transportation and communication. In every advantages given by these innovations comes in disadvantages such as climate change accelerated, global inequality was not eradicated. This means that development, although beneficial at one hand, entails cost on the other. Sinasabi dito na meron tayong mga advantages and disadvantages between globalization and sustainability. Nilalayong niya na marami tayong nakukuhang advantages, ngunit sa pamamaraan ng mga advantages na yon, sa mga bagong pamamaraan, meron din tayong mga disadvantages na mismo sa kapaligiran din ang nagdudusa. Environmental degradation. A process through which the natural environment is compromised in some way, reducing biological diversity and the general health of the environment. Ibig sabihin ang environment degradation ay tumutukoy sa unti-unting pagkasira ng kalikasan, maaaring dahil sa natural na pangyayari o kagagawan ng tao. Industrial Revolution. The period in human history which made the possibility of the cycle of efficiency. Cycle of efficiency made the process of buying of goods easier to the people. Sinasabi dito na pwedeng it harms the planet in a number of ways, katulad ng the Earth's atmosphere, destruction of coral reefs, and marine biodiversity. Harvey 2005 and Antonio 2007, Harvey noted that neoliberals and environmentalists debate the impact of free trade on the environment. Antonio, environmentalists argue that environmental issues should be given priority over economic issues. Ecological Modernization Theory, yearly 2007, sees globalization as a process that can both protect and enhance environment. Kyoto Protocol, Armitage, 2005, aimed to reduce the global carbon emissions but failed to take off largely because it was not ratified by the United States. Ritzer, 2017, significant challenges involved in implementing various measures such as carbon tax and carbon neutrality to deal with environmental problems. Villanueva 2007 stated that the use of ethanol as alternative to gasoline has an attendant set of problems less efficient in escalation of the price of the corn. Geoengineering, Dean 2007, instead of dealing with the causes of global warming, there is some interest in technological fixes such as geoengineering. What is geoengineering? Geoengineering, the deliberate, large-scale intervention in the Earth's natural system to counteract climate change. Ethanol alternative to gasoline. Number 1, less efficient. Number 2, escalation of the price of the corn, the major source of ethanol. Due to find difficult alternative to fossil fuel, biofuels produce lower emissions. Their extraction and transport contribute significantly to total emissions. Note, previous experience in dealing with environmental issues indicates that the global view of the problem is required. Thank you.
Good day everyone, my name is Shinmay Lantin from BEd 1A, and my topic for today is about food security. The demand for food will be 60% greater than it is today, and the challenge of food security requires the world to feed 9 billion people by 2050. Global food security means delivering sufficient food to entire world population. It is therefore a priority of all countries, whether developed or less developed. The security of food also means the sustainability of society such as population growth, climate change, water scarcity, and agriculture. Cite the case of India to show how complex the issue of food security is in relation to other factors. India is the second biggest producer of fruits and vegetables. Yet, according to the Food Agriculture Organization of United Nations, some 194 million Indians are undernourished. Estimate of 15.2% of the population of Indian are too malnourished. A third of the world's malnourished children live in India. The challenges food security can be traced to protection of the environment. A major environmental problem is the destruction of natural habitats, particularly through deforestation. Industrial fishing has contributed to a significant destruction of marine life and ecosystem. Biodiversity and usable farmland have also declined at a rapid pace. Another significant environment challenge is that of the decline in the availability of fresh water. The decline in the water supply because of the degradation of soil or desertification has transformed what was once considered a public good into a privatized commodity. The poorest areas of the globe experience a disproportionate share of water-related problems. The problem is further intensified by the consumption of virtual water, wherein people inadvertently use up water from elsewhere in the world through the consumption of water-intensive products. The destruction of the water ecosystem may lead to the creation of climate refugees, people who are forced to migrate due to lack of access to water or due to flooding. Pollution through toxic chemicals has had a long-term impact on the environment. The use of persistent organic pollution has led to significant industrial pollution. What is persistent organic pollutants? Persistent organic pollutants, sometimes known as forever chemicals, are organic compounds that are resistant to environmental degradation through chemicals, biologicals, and politic processes. They are toxic chemicals that adversely affect human health and the environment around the world because they can be transformed by wind and water. Most persistent organic pollutants generated in one country can and do affect people and wildlife far from where they are used and released. Greenhouse gases, gases that trap sunlight and heat in the Earth's atmosphere, contribute greatly to global warming. In turn, this process causes the melting of land-based and glacial ice with potentially catastrophic effects. The possibility of substantial flooding, a reduction in the alkalinity of the ocean and destruction of existing ecosystem. Ultimately, global warming poses threat to the global supply of food as well as to human health.
Good day everyone, my name is Queen Georgia Igagarin and I am your reporter for today, and my topic is all about economic globalization and poverty and inequality. Economic globalization refers to the mobility or movement of the people, capital, technology, goods and services internationally. Poverty is a state or condition in which a person in a community which lacks of financial resources and essential for a minimum standard of living. Inequality is an unfair situation in which some people have more rights or better opportunities than the other people. According to Hans Rosling, the Swedish statistician, the 1 to 2 billion poorest people in the world who don't have food for a day suffer from the worst disease, globalization deficiency. The way globalization is occurring could be much better, but the worst thing is not being a part of it. Economic and trade globalization is the result of companies trying to outmaneuver their competitors. While you search for the cheapest price to buy shoes, companies search for the cheapest place to make those shoes. They find the cheapest sources of leather, dye, rubber, and of course, labor. The result is that labor-intensive products like shoes are often used in countries with the lowest wages and the weakest regulations. This process creates winners and losers. The winners include corporations and their stockholders who earn more profit. They also include customers who get products at a cheaper price. The losers are the wage workers who used to make those shoes. Their jobs move overseas, but what about the low-wage foreign workers? Are they winning or losing? A lot of The multiplier effect means the increase in one's economic activity can lead to an increase in other economic activities. For example, the investing in local businesses will lead to more jobs and more income. According to the economist Paul Krugman, the Bangladesh apparel industry is going to consist of what we would consider sweatshops, or it won't exist at all. And Bangladesh, in particular, really needs its apparel industry. It's pretty much that the only thing keeping the economy afloat. The root of many arguments against economic globalization is that companies do not have to follow the same rules they do in developed countries. Some developing countries have no minimum wage laws. They do not have regulations that provide safe working conditions or protect the environment. Although nearly every country bans child labor, those laws are not always enforced. Economic globalization has helped millions of people to get out of extreme poverty. But the challenge of the future is to lift up the poor while at the same time keeping the planet livable. One of the best ways to those in extreme poverty is to enable them to participate in the economy. This applies to developing countries in the global marketplace and to the individuals at a local level. Yunus explained, in my experience, poor people are the world's greatest entrepreneurs. Every day they must innovate in order to survive. They remain poor because they don't have the opportunities to turn their creativity into sustainable income. My Many of the people who have emerged from extreme poverty in the last 25 years have jobs, wages, and working conditions that would be unthinkable and in a developed world. Economists say that it is all right, but it is progress that is very hard to achieve.
Good day, everyone. I'm Miss Jessa Labasan, your students in the Contemporary Word from Bachelor of Elementary Education, Set A. And my topic is about the global income inequality. Globalization and inequality are closely related. We can see how different nations are divided between the North and South, developed and less developed, and the core and the periphery. These differences mainly reflect one key aspect of inequality in the contemporary world. So, there are two main types of economic inequality. First is wealth inequality. Wealth refers to the net worth of a country. It takes into account all the assets of a nation, may they be natural, physical, and human. In the other words, wealth is the abundance of resources in a specific country. This means that wealth inequality speaks about in distribution of assets. And second is income inequality. Is how unevenly income is distributed throughout a population. The less equal the distribution, the higher income inequality is. Income inequality is often accompanied by wealth inequality, which is the uneven distribution of wealth. In order to measure global economic inequality, economists usually look at income using the gross domestic product or GDP. Income is the new earnings that are constantly being added to the pile of a country's wealth. When we talk about income inequality, we mean that new earnings are being distributed. It values that flow of goods and services, not a stock of assets. Let us look at both types of inequality in the global level. According to the Global Wealth Reports 2016 by the Credit Suisse Research Institute, global wealth today is estimated to be about $3.5 trillion and it is not distributed equally. Countries like the United States and Japan were able to increase their wealth. Due to currency depreciation, however, the United Kingdom had a significant decline. Furthermore, the report showed that income inequality continues to rise, while the bottom half collectively own less than 1% of total, wealthiest top 10% own 89% of all global assets. An economist who specializes in global inequality explained all this by describing an economic Big Bang, wherein the Industrial Revolution caused the differences among countries. Through this explosion of industry and modern technology, some nations became economically developed while others were developing. Ultimately, the result is the economic gap among countries. The gap between the richest and the poorest nations are greater today than in the past. Although it is the Industrial Revolution that allowed a significant inequality in the past, economic globalizations and international trade are the forces responsible in today's global income inequality. Many economists believe that the world's poorest people gained something from globalization. Access to technology also contributed to worldwide income inequality. It complemented skilled workers but replaced many unskilled workers. And modernized economies, jobs are more technology-based, generally requiring new skills. This is what economists referred to as skill-based technological change. As a result, workers who are more educated and more skilled will thrive in those jobs by receiving higher wages. On the other hand, the unskilled workers will fall behind. They will be left overtaken by machines or more skilled workers. In addition, manufacturing jobs that require low skills are moved overseas. The result is a widening gap between the rich and the poor as well as between high-skilled and low-skilled workers.
Hi everyone, my name is Maria Consuelo A. Asilo from BED 1A. So my topic is about the third world and the global south. The first world problem means a relatively trivial or minor problem or frustration. Example, when someone cracks the screen on their phones, gets the wrong order at the coffee shop, or on their social media account, You might see their complaints with a hashtag first world problem. Did you know that people often use the term third world as shorthand for poor or developing nations? By contrast, whether countries such as United States and the nation of Western Europe are described as the being part of the first world. Let us begin deconstructing the idea of the first, second, and third world hierarchy by looking their origins and their implications. The term date back to the Cold War when Western policymakers began talking about the world as three distinct political and economic blocs. The first world countries are the United States, Canada, Western Europe, and developed parts of Asia are regarded as the global north. While the global south includes the Caribbean, Latin American, South America, Africa, and part of Asia. In addition to being outdated, these terms are also inaccurate. There are more than 100 countries that fit the label of third world, but they have vastly different level of economic stability. Some are relatively poor and some is not. For example, lumping Botswana and Rwanda into the same categories does not make much sense because the average income per capita in Botswana is 9 times larger than in Rwanda. These distinctions point largely to racial inequality, especially between the black and the white. According to research at the global level, whites are disproportionately in the dominant north, while blacks are primarily in the south, although this is changing with south to north migration. In other words, the differences between the global north and the global south are shaped by migration and globalization. Nevertheless, the economic differences between the wealthy global north and poor global south have always possessed a racial character. That's all my report and thank you.
Hi, I'm Baring Elizamay, and today I'm going to discuss the global city. The rural-urban differentiation has a significant relationship to the globalization. Globalization has a deeply altered north-south relation in agriculture. For instance, the relation of agricultural production have been altered due to the rise of global agribusiness and factory farms by McMichael 2007. Sasa 1991 used the concept of global city to describe the three urban centers of New York, London, and Tokyo as economic centers that exert control over the world's political economy. World cities are categorized as such as based on the global reach of organizations found in them. Not only in their inequalities, but these cities there are also exist inequalities within each city. So, global cities is also known as the world cities. And ayon kay Sassen, hindi lamang nagkakaroon ng inequality sa mga tao, kundi nagkakaroon din ng inequality sa pagkakaiba-iba ng bansa. Wealthy nations became a wealthy kasi they choose to change and develop their country when it comes to their beliefs, values, and practices. And unlike sa poor nation, they remain poor kasi they stay kung ano yung pinamaniwalaan nila and kung anong practices ang ginagawa nila because it is their tradition. Hindi na sila nagde-develop kung ano man yung makikita nilang ikakalago ng kanilang bansa. Okay, next. Theories of global stratification. For much of human history, all of the societies on Earth were poor. Poverty was the norm for everyone, but obviously that is not the case anymore, just as you find stratification among socioeconomic classes within a society like the Philippines. You would also see across the world a pattern of global stratification, with inequalities in wealth and power between societies. So, global stratification refers to unequal distribution of wealth and power. So, kaya nagkakaroon ng extreme differences when it comes to richest and poorest nations.
Good day, everyone. I'm Inilda Ednacot, and my report is all about World Rostow's fourth stage in modernization. According to American economist Walter Rostow, modernization is the way it took place. It is always tends to a four-stage. First is the tradition stage. This refers to societies that are structured around small, local communities with the productions typically being done in family settings. Because the societies have limited resources and technology, most of their time is spent in laboring to produce food, which creates strict social hierarchy. Example of this, a feudal Europe of early Chinese dynasty. Tradition rules of society functioned what of your parents do is what their parents did what you will when you grow up to. But as people begin move beyond doing that has always been done, society moves to Rostow's second stage. The take-off stage. People began to use their individual talents to produce things beyond the necessities. The innovation creates new markets for trades. In turn, greater individualism takes hold in social status, is more closely linked in material wealth. The four Rostow stage. According to Rostow, the first stage of economic development consists of traditional society. First is tradition societies focus in the most basic of economic activities, such as a farming and extractions industry like mining and harvesting of timber. The second stage of economic development is transitional stage that establish the conditions necessary for further growth and development. This stage referred to as a preconditions that take off. At this stage, the science and technology start the process. Aids economic productions. And the third Rostow's stage is known take-off. In this stage, a handful of new industry start of the emerge in the national economy that help drive further economic growth. For example, the development of steel industry may drive growth in the economy with ready access to iron ore at this stage. And the fourth stage is known as the drive to maturity. This stage is about the diversification and expansion. The economy in this stage of growth will be developing new and more sophisticated industry. For example, an economy going from producing steel and timber production to producing consumers and electronics and computer ships in the drive to maturity stage. In the world, the economy moves beyond the cake and bread and the butter industry that failed. It takes off into a more diverse and dynamic ecosystem. Workplaces become more skilled due to the technology demands are emerging industry. Moreover, economies in this stage become less dependent upon important as their emerging industry can compete with them.
Good day everyone, my name is Shamar Jamie and my topic is all about the modernization theory. So, one of the main explanations for global stratification is the modernization theory. This theory frames global stratification as a function of technological and cultural differences between the nations. It is specifically pinpoints to historical events that contribute to Western Europe developing to a faster rate than much of the rest of the world. The first event known as the Columbian Exchange. It refers to the spread of goods, technology, education, and disease between the Americas and Europe after Christopher Columbus' so-called discovery of the Americas. This exchange worked out well for the European countries. They gained agricultural staples like potatoes, tomatoes, which contribute to the population growth and provided new opportunities for trade. The power of the merchant class. The Columbian Exchange worked out much less well, however, for Native Americans whose populations were ravaged by the diseases brought from Europe. It is estimated that in the 150 centuries, from Columbus' first trip, over 80% of the Native America's population died due to diseases such as smallpox and measles. The second historical event is the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries. This is when new technologies like steam, power, and mechanization allowed countries to replace human labor with machines and increase productivity. The Industrial Revolution at first only benefited to the wealthy in Western countries. Industrial technologies was very productivity that is gradually begin to improve in the standard for living of everyone. Countries that industrialized in the 18th and 19th centuries has a massive improvements in their standards of living, and countries that did not industrialize lag behind. So modernization theory rests on the idea that influence could be attained by anyone. But why did the Industrial Revolution not take hold everywhere? Modernization theory argues that the tension between tradition and technology's change is the biggest barrier of growth. A society that is more steeped in family system and traditions may be less willing to adopt new technologies, and the new social systems often accompany them. Why did Europe modernize? The answer of this goes back to sociologist Max Weber's ideas about the Protestant work ethic. The Protestant Reformation framed Europe to take of the progress-oriented way of life in which financial success was assigned personal virtue. Individualism replaced the communalism. This is the perfect breeding ground for modernization. This is all about my report, and thank you.
Good day everyone, I am Julian Ferrer from BEd 1A, and
and my topic for today is dependency theory and the Latin American experience. As part of our introduction, let's go back to the 1500s, where European explorers starts to explore around the world. European explorers are well known to be spread out to the countries or the continents of America, Africa, and Asia, claiming different land, different countries for Europe. From 1500s and so forth, British Empire covered about one-fourth of the world, which means British Empire conquered more than one-fourth of the world's country. And for the record, since 1500s, British Empire covered about one-fourth of the world, which means British Empire conquered so many different countries that some are now independent and some are still under their control. The next one and the last one is the United States. United States began as a colony, but then, as time passes, they soon sprawled out through the North America and took control of Haiti, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, the Hawaiian Islands, and parts of Panama and Cuba. Since these three conquered so many lands, so many different countries, just to prove they have power over other different countries, and to gain different resources that are not found in their own. What comes together with colonialism? There are two things that colonialism brought to us or to the world. One, exploitation of both natural and human resources. And the second one is the transatlantic slave trade that involves the transportation by slave traders of various enslaved African people, mainly to America. Because of colonialism, racism rise. So many African people, black people, suffered in the hands of the American people because of their skin color and because they saw them not as a person but as a slave or a tool to do what they wanted to do. This is the cycle of this slave trade. Guns and factories made goods were sent to Africa in exchange for slaves, while the slaves that came from the Africa were sent to the colonies like America and Caribbean colonies to produce goods like cotton and tobacco, while the produced goods were sent back to Europe. You can see in the picture how the Americans and Europe do this slave trading. Guns and factory-made goods will be brought to Africa for them to buy slaves. And then the slaves will be brought to the Caribbean or the American colonies to produce different goods such as cotton and tobacco. And then the cotton and tobacco will be brought to the Europe and be sold there. In the mid-19th century, slave trade died down. And then, at this point, the point of colonialism came to be less about human resources, and it focuses more on natural resources. This means that colonialism focuses more on the trading of natural resources more than trading of slaves or human resources, which is a good thing because it will lessen the suffering of the African people or other different people or countries that they took slaves. Even though slave trade died down, colonial model kept on going. Under colonial reign, European countries took control of land and raw materials to funnel wealth back to the West. Most colonies lasted until 1960. In 1870, only 10% of Africa were colonized. But then, in 1940, only Ethiopia and Liberia were not colonized. This just shows that colonialism still keeps going strong even though slave trading is no longer present. In 1997, Hong Kong was finally granted independence. After the Second World War, there's still a question revolving around the world. a question about international relations. The question is, why are many countries in the world not developing? The common answer is because these countries are not pursuing the right economic policies, or their governments are authoritarian or corrupt. It's true since a lot of countries focuses on the problem of their countries rather than finding a solution for the existing problem. And some countries are having a leader that doesn't care about his country but cares about his wealth, which is a corrupt leader and not a good leader. Though this answer is true, some Latin American scholars, however, are critical of that answer and are intrigued by the region's underdevelopment. Because of the intrigue, Latin American scholars' dependency theory has been made. Dependency theory is defined as an approach to understand economic underdevelopment that emphasizes the fluctuative constraint imposed by the global political and economic order. According to Cardoso and Pilato in 1979, dependency is the condition in which the development of the nation-states of the South contribute to a decline in independence and to an increase in economic development of the countries of the North. While according to Toye in 2002, in addition to what Cardoso and Pilato talks about, argues that liberal trade causes great impoverishment, not economic improvement, to less developed countries. This just means that liberal trade contributes to the country's losses of income or wealth rather than giving it an improvement to become a better country. Now, let's talk about the focus of dependency theory. Dependency theory focuses on how poor countries have been wronged by richer nations, rather than focusing on what poor countries are doing wrong. In addition, it argues that the prospect of both wealthy and poor countries are inextricably linked, or much more closer than we thought. It also argues that in a world of finite resources, we cannot understand why rich nations are rich without realizing that those riches came at the expense of another country being poor. This means that in this world with finite or limited resources, rich country became rich because of poor countries, taking or obtaining the poor country's natural resources and use it for its own gain. In this view, global stratification starts in colonialism. This means that the unequal distribution of wealth or global stratification is caused by colonialism. Dependency theory. Dependency theory initially developed by Hans Singer and Raoul Prebisch in the 1995 and has improved since then. The picture is Hans Singer and the second picture is Raoul Prebisch. The two main sub-theories of dependency theory. Number one is the North American neo-Marxist approach and the second one is Latin American structuralist approach. There are two terms used as the heart of dependency theory. Number one is core nation and peripheral nations. Core nations are more industrialized nations who receive majority of the world's wealth. Peripheral nations, on the other hand, countries that are less developed and receive an unequal distribution of the world's wealth. Though generally divided into core or peripheral nations, dependency theorists recognize that there are a number of different kinds of states in the world. There is a common assumption about dependency theory. According to Anton, even after decolonization, there are still important ties between the developed and less developed countries,
which mainly consist in the exploitation of peripheral natural resources and workforce by the center. Dependency theorists saw that the development of peripheral nation is stagnant because of the exploitative nature of the core nation. This means that the core nation depends on the natural resources or other resources of the peripheral nations, preventing the peripheral nations to gain or improve on its own.
Hello everyone, my name is Angelina Bucauto. Today, I will discuss about the modern world system. Wallerstein described high-income nation as the core of the world economy. Low-income countries, meanwhile, are Wallerstein called the periphery, whose natural resources and labor support the wealthier countries, first as colonies and now by working for multinational corporation under neocolonialism. So, sinasabi dito na inilarawan ni Wallerstein ang mga bansang may mataas na kita bilang buod ng ekonomiya sa mundo. Samantala, yung mga bansang may mababang kita, ayon kay Wallerstein, na tinatawag na periphery na ang mga likas na yaman ay sumusuporta sa mas mayayamang bansa. Una, bilang mga kolonya at sa pamamagitan ng pagtatrabaho para sa mga multinational na korporasyon sa ilalim ng neocolonialism, na ang ibig sabihin na ay ang pagsakop ng isang mas makapangyarihang bansa sa isang mahina at inaabuso ito sa ekonomikal na pamamaraan. Immanuel Wallerstein. Immanuel Wallerstein was an American sociologist and economic historian. Born September 28, 1930, in New York, United States. Immanuel Wallerstein died August 31, 2019. Known for world system theory. First, poor nations tend to have a few resources to export to rich countries. Poor countries are also more likely to lack industrial capacity, so they have to import expensive manufactured goods from richer nations. Yung mga mahihirap na bansa ay may posibilidad na magkaroon ng mga kaunting mapagkukunan upang i-export sa mayayamang bansa. Ang mahihirap na bansa ay mas malamang na kulang sa kapasidad ng industriya kaya kailangan nilang mag-import ng mamahaling mga paninda mula sa mayayamang bansa. Some of the poorest countries in Africa, like Ethiopia, were never colonized as have very little contact with richer nations. Likewise, some of former colonies like Singapore and Sri Lanka now have a flourished economy. Ang ilan nga sa pinakamahirap na bansa tulad ng Ethiopia ay kailanman ay hindi naging kolonisado at kakaunti ang pakikipag-ugnay sa mas mayamang bansa. Kaya, ang ilan sa mga dating kolonya tulad ng Singapore at Sri Lanka ay mayroon na ngayong maunlad na ekonomiya. The growth of the world economy and expansion of the world trade have coincided with rising standard of living worldwide, with even the poorest nation almost tripling in the last century. But with increased trade between countries, trade agreements such as the North American Free Trade Agreement or NAFTA have become a major point of debate, pitting the benefits of free trade against the cost of jobs within a country's borders. Ang paglabungan ng pandaigdigang ekonomiya at pagpapalawak ng pandaigdigang kalakalan ay kasabay ng pagtaas ng pamantayan sa pamumuhay sa buong mundo na kahit ang pinakamahihirap na bansa ay halos triple sa huling siglo. Ngunit ang pagtaas ng kalakalan sa pamamagitan ng mga bansa, ang mga kasunduan sa kalakalan tulad ng North American Free Trade Agreement ay naging isang pangunahing punto ng debate na pinaghahalo yung mga benepisyo ng malalayang kalakalan laban sa halaga ng mga trabaho sa loob ng hangganan ng isang bansa. The share of the people globally living of less than $25 per day has more than halved since 1981, going from 52% to 22% as of 2008.